Okay, tonight if you will turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17, we're going to read, we're going to study, and we're going to learn from one of the greatest stories in the Old Testament and one of the most exciting stories to children in the whole Bible. I'm sure it's one of their favorites, and I know it's one of mine. Okay, we're in 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're going to read the entire chapter before we have any teaching on it at all. Everybody? Found 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 1. Everybody there? Okay. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, gathered together at Shochoh, which belonged to Judah, and pitched between Shochoh and Azekah in the feast and Damas. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side. And there was a great valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. My cross-reference says he was 9 3/4 feet tall. That is tall. That is 2 feet higher than the ceiling. That is, do you understand that? That is 2 feet higher than the ceiling. That is big. Verse 5. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass, and he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders, and the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. That's 21 pounds. That is heavy for the head of a spear. And one bearing a shield went before him. Verse 8. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you one man for you, and let him come down to me. Verse 9. If ye be able to fight with me, and kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him, and kill him, then shall ye be our servants, and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judea, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons. And the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle. And the names of his 3 sons that went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and next to him Abinadab, and the third Shema. And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening, and presented himself there for 40 days. He does this every day. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren. And carry these 10 cheeses unto the captains of their thousands, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with Philistines. And David rose up early in the morning, and left the sheep with the keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. There says all the men of Israel. And the men of Israel said, Have ye seen this man that has come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth the Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, so shall it be done to the man that killeth him. And Eliab his eldest brother heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, Why camest thou down hither, and with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down to see, that thou mightest see the battle. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him toward another, and spake after the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former manner. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. He's talking about Goliath. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Saul, Thy servant, speaking about himself now, kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant, he's talking about himself, slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. David said, moreover, The Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee. And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put a helmet of brass upon his head, and he armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. Or was he hesitated? He stopped there a minute, and he hadn't proved this armor. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. So David put them off. And he took his staff in his hand, and he chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. And the Philistine came and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of a fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog that thou comest to me with staves, which means sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hastened and ran for the army to meet the Philistine. Boy, he ran towards him. Don't sound like he's too afraid, does it? And David put his hand in his bag, and he took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran, stood upon the Philistine, and took out his sword. He took Goliath's own sword, drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines until thou come to the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way to Shaphan, even unto Gath and unto Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine, he took old Goliath's head he cut off, and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. And the king said, inquire thou whose son the stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the servant of thy servant Jesse, Bethlehemite. Okay, now we're going back earlier in chapter 17, and first we notice the description that he gave of Goliath. I mean, you can see there that he's a man unlike any man that we've ever known. In the natural, a man wouldn't be able to have any chance against a giant like this, right, with natural ability. So he presented himself as a formidable foe, I mean, unsurmountable. And what I want you to see in this early part of this chapter is that this is a good picture of Satan. Here we find a good, excellent picture of Satan's actions and the mannerisms. Now look down in verse 8, we're going to see something here. And then we're going to point out to you how Satan operates the same way. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel and said unto them, why are ye come out to set your battle in array? In other words, why did you bring all this big army down here? He said, am I not a Philistine, and you are all servants of Saul? Why don't you choose one man, right, and let him come down to me? Okay, now, right there is the first thing Satan does is to try to get you to fight him on where he's at the advantage. There was the biggest man in the whole nation of Israel was Saul. And it tells you back when he was selected as king that he was head and shoulders above any man in the nation of Israel, which means he was at least a foot taller than the biggest man in Israel, and he was about 7 feet tall. Okay? He was their champion, that's why they selected him as king. But in comparison to the size of Goliath, it wouldn't have been a fair fight. Right? So Satan, the first thing Satan seeks to do is get you to fight him on his terms. In other words, he's going to name the terms to you and hope that it don't occur to you that you don't have to fight him on his terms. You fight him on God's terms. Okay, that's the first thing you want to see. I think you see that. Now, verse 9. Next thing Satan will do to you, after he'll offer you his terms, he says, in verse 9, if he be able to fight with me and kill me, then will we be your servants? But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall you be our servants and serve us. I'm going to read verse 10. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. And what I want you to see right there is that Goliath did the same thing Satan does every time that Satan ever approaches a Christian. He lies. He lied. He told a point-blank lie. He said that if you send a man and he's able to overcome me, that all the Philistines will fall down and they'll be your servants. Isn't that what he said? We'll find out later when we go back. He lied. Satan always does. Okay? That's what we're looking at. Well, first he tried to get you to approach him on his own terms. Secondly, he lied to him. Now the next thing that he comes at you with, verse 11. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Why? Or you might say they were filled with fear. Why? Because as they looked at this man, remember he come out and did this every day for 40 days. And then every man was thinking individually, man, I hate to have to go. I'm not going to be the man to go out and fight him. You know, looking at it on Satan's terms, on Goliath's terms. You know, which one of us is going to go? I don't want to go. That put fear into them. Actually, they could have sent 500 men out there and killed Goliath, no matter how big he was, right? They took him upstairs. They could have went out there and killed him. But they wasn't thinking with good wisdom. They was thinking of an answer to the challenge that he made. And that's what Satan always tries to do, is present you with something and get you thinking in his terms. See? Because the terms that he'll present to you always will make it look to you like there's no way to win. And the result is going to be F-E-A-R, fear. Every time. If you ever let Satan make you look at something, you know, he'll point you out all the things that make it look to you like there's no way to win. And the next thing, if you'll accept that, fear is going to grip you just like it did every man in the nation of Israel except one. Okay? That's what we're going to find out. So you see the three things that we've seen already is Satan would appear, as I wrote in my reference there, as a lion, because in reference to Satan, he goes about as a roaring lion. He goes about as one. He's not one, but he wants to put up all the front of being one. Okay? Now, Goliath was, in the natural, a formidable opponent. But as it proved, against somebody that has God on their side, he was not much. Okay? Are we together? Then he tried to get them on his own terms, to agree to his terms. Then he'd lie to them, and then he tried to instill fear into them. So he was doing a pretty good job, because he did this for 40 days. Right? Until a little shepherd boy who was about 18 years old came along. He'd come to bring food to his brothers. He didn't know any of this was going on. He just thought there was a big battle. And so when he gets there and he hears this, man, he couldn't believe it. David couldn't believe it. Okay, in verse 26, when David asked the question, well, what happens to the man that goes out and defeats this giant? And they told him what would happen. He would be greatly rewarded. And his question was this: well, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy all the whole armies of the living God? That he couldn't believe it. Or now in verse 28, when his brother overhears this conversation, he's filled with jealousy, man. He's one of the ones been hiding in a hole for 40 days. Now his young brother comes up there and can't believe that these men are just shaking in their boots with terror. And boy, it makes his brother mad. Well, that's kind of natural, isn't it? But he said, I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart. He said, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. I'm real surprised here David didn't say what battle. I don't see anything, but you hide in the hole. I'm really surprised he didn't say that. I believe that's what he thought. And David said, what have I done? Is there not a cause? You telling me that I'm looking at this situation, you tell me there ain't a cause to say what I said? Looks to me like somebody needs to say it. That's what he's telling them. All right, when these men that were in this conversation with David, they went straight to the king, told him what David had said. So Saul said, I want to see who this man is. It sounds like we got somebody that's got a little courage. And so he said for David, in verse 32, David's first thing he said to Saul was, let no man's heart fail because of him, speaking of Goliath. He said, thy servant, now he's talking about himself, he said, I'll go and fight with the Philistine. Don't y'all have no heart attack over this. This is, I'll take care of your giant for you, king. Don't worry about it. So then, of course, looking in the natural is what Saul was doing. In verse 33, he said, you're not able, to go fight against this Philistine, but you're only accused, and this is a great man of war. So then David had to kind of say a few words there to get the king to allow him permission. He couldn't have went if Saul hadn't allowed him to. You know that. Those people honored their kings. If their king had said, cut off your head, they'd run and done. Okay, so he told a story about killing the lion and the bear, right? That'd take a little moxie to grab up. I don't know which one he caught by his beard, whether it was the lion or the bear, but anyway, he caught him by the beard and killed him. And he said, well, let's see. Now, what we're going to do is this. Holding all that in your mind, we're going to go down to verse 40, and we're going to see the essence of this study tonight. Okay? It's very important. Something that I wondered about 10 years ago and I didn't get the answer on till today. It's good. Verse 40. Well, let me just kind of fill you in. So once Saul had decided to let David go, he tried to put on him his armor and everything, which of course was probably much too big, and it was so heavy and cumbersome. David said, well, he knew. He said, I can't wear that. In the first place, I had to prove it. You have to go prove yourself in battle before you even qualify to wear armor like that. And he said, I can't use that. He said, I had to prove them. So instead, David, in verse 40, says, and he took his staff in his hand, and if he was right-handed, I'm sure he carried it just took his staff in his left hand, and I feel like David was right-handed, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip, and his sling was in his hand, and I think his sling was in his right hand. I don't know why I'm thinking it, maybe because I'm right-handed. And he drew near to the Philistine. Okay, so what we want to find out today is what I wondered about 10 years ago, is David knew what was going on. It says that he took and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, put them in his bag, and yet when why 5, and what do the 5 stones represent? Okay, that'd be something good to know, wouldn't it? Have you wondered it before? Well, you heard it again. Let's hope we hear the answer. So anyway, we see here that, we'll go into it one verse at a time. So anyway, he goes on out to meet the Philistine. First of all, let's answer the question as to what these 5 stones represent, and verse by verse. And then I think you'll get what God wants you to get out of this. Okay, God gave it to me right before Bible study that the 5 stones represented these 5 things. I'm going to tell you what they are, and then we're going to go through and see if we can find it in here. Okay? 1, love. Just list them down, and then we'll discuss each one. 2, faith. 3 is hope. 4 is righteousness. And last, but not least, they're all equal in this respect, is judgment. The judgment of God. That's the 5 stones that he chose. Now you let's start wondering in your mind which one of them was that he slung knocked the Philistine down with. Would it be an actual question? Okay. So now let's look at each of these 5 things and see why that is. All right, let's look first at love. The first thing, we'll go back to verse 32. Okay? And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Now when it says don't let any man's heart fail, he's talking about have no fear. Have no fear. Okay? Now why was David able to say that? Because of what we learned later on in the New Testament, and it's many places I'm sure in the Old Testament. Perfect love casteth out fear. Love has no fear. Right? David was without fear. That's what Brother Albany said. Now, did he have love? Well, most assuredly he did, because it's told all through the Old Testament that David was a man after God's own heart. Have you ever heard that? David was, that's why God chose him, because he was a man after God's own heart. Well, what is the first and greatest of all commandments? Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, thy soul, and mind. Okay? So David loved God with all his heart. There's no question about that. That's why God chose him. So David had the love, and that love that was in David cast out all fear. He was the only one there who was not afraid. Is anybody here that would question that that's not true? All right, now let's see. I'm going to start with that's 1, 2. Well, let's go to 3. Now look at verse 3. And let's see if David had some faith. Okay? You know he did, but we want to see it in the context of the story. David said, moreover, the same Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. Oh, then I'm sorry, I'm at number 3. I've got my things numbered. Okay? Okay. All right, verse 37. Do you want me to read it again? Okay, now we're looking for faith. We're going to see if these 5 things are in David, okay? We're sure that love is, because love that's the greatest of all things. Without love, you couldn't have faith or judgment or hope or righteousness. Would you all agree to that? Okay. We're looking for faith. Now let's see, does David have faith in verse 37? David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. Now that is faith talking. That is faith talking. Remember that scripture. In fact, we'll just go right over here. That's good. We'll put this 3 right beside it. Everybody with me? Let's look at verse 37 and say that David definitely is talking faith. Right? Is he talking the faith talk? Is he speaking words of faith? He said, my God will deliver me. Right? He's talking faith. And in verse 48, and it came to pass when the Philistines arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hastened and ran towards the enemy to meet the Philistine. He put feet to his faith. He was talking faith and he was walking faith. And he was walking fast. Huh? Now that's not faith without works. That's not dead faith. That's not saying I believe it. He said I believe it, and then he backed it up. Okay? Can you see that David was operating totally in faith? Because in the natural, point out again, in the natural there would have been no way of winning this contest. All right, that's faith. Now we've covered love and faith. Now I'm going to show you hope. Have your spiritual ears on. In verse 36, David is recalling to King Saul an incident that happened earlier in his life, and he says, thy servant, talking about himself, slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised, he's talking about something that's already happened, right? He said, I slew the lion and the bear. See that? Verse 36. And now he's getting into God's hope. And he said, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them. That's his hope. That there's going to be no difference So he's setting his hope, his expectation is in victory, right? You see it? That's his expectation, is that this Philistine is going to be no different than the lion and the bear. The same God that delivered him from the lion and the bear is going to deliver me from this Philistine. He said it's going to be no difference. That's where he set his hope. Hope is your thermostat, where you set that your faith's going to obtain for you. Okay? We together? Now there's your hope. That's in 36. Now, in verse 4, and we're going to 5. All right, verse 45. Is everybody with me? Is everybody with me? Nod your head. That was good. That was really good. Okay, verse 45. Then said David to the Philistine. Now, we're looking for righteousness. 45. Then said David to the Philistine. Now, we're looking for righteousness. Thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield. Okay, now I've got a little note made in my Bible right after that. It goes with that. Okay, what are those things? Carnal weapons. Okay, everybody see that? I'm going to read it again. I wrote in carnal weapons. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me. Now, you're coming at me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield. These are carnal weapons, right? Remember the scripture in the New Testament that tells you that our weapons, the weapons of our warfare, are not carnal but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood. Okay, you might say here David in the natural was wrestling against flesh and blood, but David didn't see it that way. He didn't look at it that way, because we're told not to look at it that way. We're told the just shall live by faith, and David went out to meet this Philistine by faith. Did he not? Okay. So David has told him what he's coming to him, his weapons are. But now he's going to tell the Philistine what his weapons are. He says, But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. Y'all hold your places there. I'm going to go over and read you the scripture. Okay? As I find Isaiah. Stay where you're at. All right. Now listen. Huh? Are you with me? Now listen. David told Goliath, you come to me with carnal weapons, a sword, a shield, and a spear. He did. He said, but my weapons ain't carnal. He said, I'm coming at you in the name of the Lord, God of the armies of Israel. Now, here's what David was coming at him with. Remember what I quoted about the weapons of our warfare are not carnal? David was coming at Goliath with the word of God. Okay, I'm going to read you Isaiah 54:17. Just write that down, but don't try to go through it. Hold your place. No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is of me, saith the Lord. Okay? Now, Goliath has formed some weapons against this servant of God, right? And God is telling us here in His Word that their righteousness, David's righteousness that he come at Goliath with, was not his own, but it was God's. You got it? Are we together? Now in verse 40, we're going to leave that righteousness for just a minute. In verse 46, this is what David, right now, right in the midst of this, is actually almost standing in as a prophet, because this is God. This is David is saying this, but God is saying it through David. Do you see this? Now listen to what David says. He said, This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand. Okay, that's his confession. And I will smite thee and take thine head from thee, and I will give thy carcass, the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Now that's very important. Even in the last days which we're living in, when and all the prophecies concerning the end times, God tells you He's going to do great wonders and stuff. He said the whole earth's going to know that there is a God. See? It was important to him then. That's one of the most important. Anybody don't believe there's a God is fixing to be surprised. They're fixing to find out different. Okay? Now, what I want you to see in verse 46, that God's judgment is passed on Goliath. Exactly the very thing that's fixing to happen to him is spoken into the earth. The judgment of God is spoken into the earth before it takes place. Do you see it? This is the God's judgment in verse 46. What did I say? I've read all four. Okay, I'm going to read verse 47. And all this assembly, in other words, everybody here, both armies, shall know that the Lord saveth not with the sword and spear, not with carnal weapons, right? For the battle is the Lord's, and He will give you into our hands. He'll give you into our hands. Okay, now I have a reference here. I'm going to look up real quick. 2 Chronicles 20:15. You don't have to look at that. Okay, y'all with me? Okay. And I'm reading from chapter 20 of 2 Chronicles, verse 15. And he said, Hearken ye all of Judah, and ye inhabitants of Jerusalem, thou King Jehoshaphat. Thus saith the Lord unto you, Be not afraid, nor dismayed by reason of this great multitude. Now this was when Israel was facing a great big army, just similar to what they're doing here. Only now Israel's not looking at the army, they're looking at one man. For the battle is not yours, but God's. Okay, that's why David is so sure of victory. He said 2 or 3 times here that this Philistine and the whole bunch of Philistines, but particularly this one, has defied the armies of the living God. Okay, so now we're talking about 5 things here, okay, that were on David's side, okay? Those 5 things being love, faith, hope, righteousness, and judgment. And I think if you are, we'll look at it from a spiritual standpoint, you'll see all 5 of those things are in David, in his words and his actions. Okay, and those 5 things all are weapons. Like any one of those 5 things can be your weapon, right? And if you think not, of course you know that love casteth out fear, so therefore it could be looked at as a weapon. We know that faith, the shield of faith, will quench all the fiery darts of the wicked, right? We know that hope, what can I say about hope? If you don't have something to set your faith on, you're without hope, then you're not going to put your faith out. You're not going to release your faith if there's not some good thing that you're hoping for from God. Okay? Right. The lack of hope destroys all your faith. So that's what I say. If you don't have any hope for something that you're hoping for, then faith's not going to do any good. There's no way to release it, no direction to give it. All right, now as far as righteousness, the breastplate of righteousness is listed among the armor, is it not? Okay. Which protects your whole, your vital organs. Your righteousness is very important as far as a weapon of warfare. Of course, now judgment's the one that we really want to see. Of course, we see all these things, but now judgment, I don't know, when he reaches in that bag and he's running, and he gets one stone out, I don't know that it was, I don't know how I can prove that the stone that he pulled out represents judgment, other than the fact that that's the stone that delivered God's judgment to him. That's the last God one day. I say that he reached in there and he pulled out God's judgment, and he was happy. That was good, wasn't it? Huh? I'm serious. It was, God. This is good. I like this. Okay, now, before I forget to cover this, I want you to look down in verse 51, okay? And also, if anybody ever asks you how David killed Goliath, and they'll tell you that he killed him with a sling, right? A stone from a sling. It's not true. Did you know that? You do? You did? Well, you need to know it. Let's go and make sure you get that. Now, well, at least you'll be learning something that's right. In verse 50, it says, So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone. See, only threw one stone at him. It says, and smote the Philistine. In other words, that means struck, right? And it says, and slew him. Okay, now that's the end of the thought. And when it gets to the end of that thought, it says, but there was no sword in the hand of David. Well, then why would he need a sword if he had already killed him? Well, has he already killed him? No. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine and took out his sword and drew it out of the sheath thereof and slew him. That right there is when he killed him. He slew him and cut off his head therewith. Okay, so he used his own weapon against him. Now you might just think about that in regards to Satan. When he comes at you with a weapon, you got mightier weapons, right? But his weapons can be turned against him too. They can be made to fall to the ground, or they can be sent back whence they came. Can they not? Okay. We're not going to worry about that. We got better weapons. Now, remember I told you a while ago that Satan would always lie to you? He'd always make you some kind of an offer that even if you called his bluff, and matched his challenge, which David did, right? He still lied. He said that if Goliath stood out there and he said, if your man defeats me, he said, all the Philistines will come and be your servants, didn't he? In verse 51, Therefore David ran, stood upon the Philistine, took out his sword, drew it out of the sheath, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champions was dead, they all run over there and said, we're going to be your servants. No, they all run off. He knew his line when he said it. They all run off. They had to run after him and kill him. They didn't have no intention of being nobody's servant. Satan, like Satan might tell you, well, we'll have this contest, and if you beat me, I'll do this for you, and if you lose, then you do this for me. He'd lie. If he lost, he'd be lying to you, wouldn't he? Just like he promised Jesus all the kingdoms of the world. Well, if Jesus fell down and worshipped him, he'd turn around and kill Jesus. He wouldn't give him nothing. Now, I want you to see something else, too. And I think you're going to see this in real life. In the last days, you're going to see the same thing. Right now, today, most people, a majority of people. Okay, in verse 52, the men of Israel and of Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines until they came to the valley and to the gates of Ekron, and the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way to Sherarium, even unto Gath to Ekron. Okay? Verse 53, and the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. In other words, they took all their goods that the Philistines had run off and left. And the reason I wanted to point that out to you is today, the majority of people either don't know anything about Satan, or either, I think a lot of them do, in their hearts, and they're trying to deny his existence and what he's doing out of fear. You know what I'm saying? So they don't want to get in on this deal because they're really afraid to tangle with the devil, if you want to know the truth, because of fear. Because of his big bluff that he called out like Goliath did. They're looking at mine, I ain't going to tangle with the devil. I ain't no shape to antagonize nobody. When you're sick, can't feel. But you watch what I'm telling you. When this body of Christ, that's going to be without spot and blemish, stands up in the earth and goes walking through this earth, not giving the devil any place and just stomping his head everywhere they find him. You're going to watch everybody, all the Christians, going to want to jump and run and get on the bandwagon and get in on the spoils. You watch them when they see what happens. Everybody's going to come on and get people you can't get to them. They're going to all come and say, hey, I want to go with you. I want to be in on this. I believe it now. Truly, I believe it after Goliath's death. But I'm going to tell you something. I wrote in something here in the top of my Bible. God gave that victory over Goliath. He gave it not to those who hid in trenches. I said that as nice as I could. I started saying something else. He didn't give the victory to them. He gave the victory to David. David's the one that got to be the king. They got the big spoils. So again, it's going to be the same with the body of Christ. These people, latecomers, going to wait and stay back till they think the danger's over, and then there's nothing but, boy, they're prospering. They're getting rich. God's blessing them. I'm going to go see if I can get in on that. They ain't going to be it. Won't be. It'll be too late. There's going to be people try to get in. Too late. That's the prophecy. See, David is the one. He's the one that had the love, right? That cast out all fear. He's the one that had the faith to believe God would deliver him. He's the one that had enough hope in him, the hope from God that God was going to give him the victory. And he was the one that believed in the righteousness of God would prevail over wickedness every time, right? And he's the one that knew that God would not let the wicked stand against his judgment. And he's the one that God made the king. That's what I want you to say. Remember, it says we shall be kings and priests with him. We're talking about with Jesus. Well, it ain't going to be the people that's hiding in the closets. It's not going to be kings and priests. They'll probably be serving you. I'm not saying it in an ugly manner. I just believe that's what it's going to be. I don't think that they're going to get the same reward as somebody that'll go out here and buck heads with the devil and is with no fear when everybody's hiding in the trenches. That's all I got.